We are ranking fantasy football wide receivers for the 2022 season. This is part 2 of the wide receiver rankings episode. If you missed the first one, you might want to go check that out first. The wide receiver ones in 2022, according to Matthew Williamson, my illustrious co-host. So part 2, we're going wide receiver 13 all the way down through 30, plus some of our favorite sleepers and maybe some league winners in there somewhere on today's episode of Peacock and Williamson.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, we're talking wide receivers, fantasy wide receivers, Matt. And I'm glad, Matt, we have a back and forth here every day talking about football and off the air life a little bit. And I'm glad sometimes what I say does resonate with you. Before we went live here, you took my advice and you actually already changed your top 12 rankings and you flipped Tyreek Hill and T. Higgins at 9 and 12. So you got T. Higgins down at 12 now. Tyreek bumped up a little bit up to number 9. And so we've kind of been doing a fantasy war room with some of these where you have some rankings and we argue about them, or we just come in fresh and both try to rank them out. And sometimes what I say does make some sense here. So I'm glad you recognize that.
100%. And I like to think that one of my strengths as an analyst is listening to others. There's about 10 web pages I go to every morning, and I learn something every time I click on them. And I've often referenced other podcasts. I like to listen to as many opinions as I possibly can, and sometimes make them my own, sometimes battle them, but I just like to hear a lot of different viewpoints. And I think I learned that from the NFL ranks. Like a good GM sits there in a war room full of scouts that all know their stuff, weighs everyone's opinions, and then goes with the final answer. I mean, I want to get it right. I don't care as much about my ego. And I thought you had some great points. So, yep, Tyreek bumped up. That always kind of bugged me that he was at 12. And Higgins, who's a number 2 on his team, goes to 12. So they flip-flopped.
And if you the higher you put Chase, the lower you have to put Higgins in a way, right? Because they're fighting for the same target share.
Yeah, but I think they're both exceptional players, and it's going to be a big target share.
And if T. Higgins ends up wide receiver 9, maybe Chase is more like wide receiver 6 instead of 3 and 12. So a little bit bigger gap there. And we'll see what Jamar Chase looks like. And you can go back and listen to the top 12. I will go through them now to spoil that for you. The first 12 wide receivers in Matt Williamson's 2022 wide receiver rankings. And they go Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, CD Lamb, Devontae Adams at 6, Mike Evans, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill now at 9, DJ Moore 10, Terry McLaurin, and T. Higgins. That's the first 12 in Matt Williamson's wide receiver rankings for fantasy football in 2022. There's still some amazing names left on this list. And if you're drafting in a certain way, I'm getting the feeling now that if I am, some leagues, you have a certain way where you get to maybe select where you're going to draft. And a league I play in, if you won last year, the thing you get is you get to select what your draft position is going to be the next draft.
That's cool. I like that.
Like drafting, usually I like to be someone who drafts a little bit later, as I don't like waiting all the way around for my second pick. But looking at where the wide receivers are ranked right now, if I could get Jonathan Taylor at 1.1, come all the way back around at the turn and double up on some of these names at wide receiver, I'd be feeling pretty good about my fantasy football roster.
Yeah. First off, I think I've told people this before, but one thing I like about my home league, my high school buddies league, is we get together a couple weeks before the draft. We bring a deck of cards, and if you get the ace, you can pick. I pick 1, 2, 4, 12. The dumbheads just pick 1, 2. I think that's an integral part to the season is, boy, this year I really want to pick at the end of the first round. This year I really want to pick at the first. And rule of thumb, I like to be in the middle just because in the 7th, 8th round, if I'm torn between somebody, there's a chance just 12 picks later I get that same guy if I'm picking in the middle. Where the ends, it's like kiss them goodbye if you don't pick them.
And I tend to like a little bit of extra time rather than having to go boom, boom, because sometimes you're torn. You don't know who to take, and you got to take 2 guys, let alone 1. So I do tend to like to go middle of the round to get a better second player than waiting a long time. This might be one of those years where you might want an earlier pick because there's so few bell cow running backs in the NFL.
Yeah.
And but that's because of the wide receivers and how deep they are. And when you're looking at this thing and tiering them out, I don't even know where to put the tiers. The tiers are like kind of Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson at the top, and there's some really good players behind that. But
yeah,
AJ Brown comes in at number 13 for you, and
he's awesome.
I wouldn't fight you to put AJ Brown 3 instead of 13, 10 spots higher, right?
I know. I adore the player. I think it's a great trade for the Eagles. I'm not copping out already, but I bet I change my second 12 much more than I changed my first 12, although I made a big change since Friday in the first 12. But there's a lot of good names in this neighborhood. I just think Devontae Smith's a quality number 2. Goddard's one of my highest ranked tight ends. And I expect the Eagles' pass percentage to go up, but still be at the bottom of the league. I just don't like the pie that AJ's picking from, but he's awesome.
All the wide receivers that changed teams, it hurt their fantasy value.
It scares me a little, yeah.
Tyreek, Devontae Adams, and now AJ Brown.
Right.
And I think that's fair. I think they are in positions to be targeted less than they were before on their old rosters. And you never know how the rapport is with their new quarterbacks on their new team. So AJ Brown coming in at number 13, which, I would feel pretty good about getting him as the 13th wide receiver off the board.
100%. It does scare me a little that I have all 3 of those guys lower than where they would have been with their old teams, because the new teams gave up a ton to get all 3 of them. They had big plans for these guys.
Yeah, they got them for a reason.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Jalen Hurts is not going to drop back and chuck it 45 times a game either.
No.
We were pretty sure about that. So here's where I start to have some problems with your list again, Matt. And it's not your list. It's everybody's lists. And you have Michael Pittman coming in at wide receiver 14 and DK Metcalf at 15.
Yeah.
And DK
I might
Metcalf
have to flip
is
those.
just well, and it's not even so much that. It's just DK Metcalf is too good to be 15 on anybody's list. Where you can get DK Metcalf in leagues right now is robbery. And I don't care who the quarterback is. If it's Geno Smith, DK put up numbers with Geno last year. And he's just too good. And the worse the Seahawks are, the more they might have to throw the ball. I think DK is going to get his. I think his star is ascending while Tyler Lockett might be starting to wane a little bit. So this offense is going to be run through DK as much as any Seahawks offense in the past has been run through a wide receiver. So and Geno can get the ball to him down the field. So I think that DK Metcalf is someone who's just too low everywhere. And there's so many good receivers ahead of him. So I understand, but it's just phenomenal value at this point is kind of my point. And I mean, DK Metcalf, a wide receiver 15, just give me that all day long.
Yeah. I just made him 14 and Pittman 15. And it's funny because they went to college together, but AJ Brown and DK are kind of similar in that they would be extremely high on my list of we're picking up teams for the rest of their career. They're both really high in the dynasty world. Coincidentally, early this offseason, I traded Pittman and Marquis Brown. He was a Raven at that time, straight up for Metcalf. And I think I just want Metcalf on my team. Like, I have a lot of respect for Pittman. I think he's probably going to get better targets than Metcalf, but Metcalf's just better. I mean, none of us would pick Pittman over Metcalf if we're picking up teams.
And I think what could even strengthen Metcalf is if he doesn't sign and decides to play out his contract year. Mm-hmm. I always love the contract year players. So yeah, give me some DK Metcalf right now.
Yeah.
Wide receiver 16 is
him and 17. What do you think of these two? These are the Chargers.
Yeah. So we got Keenan Allen,
cheated 16, a little. Yeah.
Mike Williams back to back. And yeah, I can tell you making this list, you don't know how to break them up. So you're like, well, I'll just put them back to back.
Yeah, they're both really good, but they're really different.
Keenan Allen, sort of the slot guy that gets more targets, and Mike Williams, the outside guy, that's going to get more yards per catch, but be targeted less? And does it start to skew towards Mike Williams a little bit more after getting paid with the strong arm quarterback? They're going to chuck a little bit deeper. I mean, it's hard to imagine Keenan Allen not getting his, even though he's getting a little bit older and a little bit older. And yeah, I'm with you. It's hard to break these two up.
It is. And people listen on Friday, I said, Evans and Allen were two guys that I've ranked quite high, as everybody does, and they deserve it, that I think are depreciating assets. And some of that's my dynasty background, that when someone's going to be worth less a year from now than they are now, and you basically know it, and their game's starting to slip, I inherently have a hard time investing in that player. But his situation is awesome. I mean, on 3rd and 6, it's going to Allen. Herbert trusts him to no end, and it's still a young quarterback that needs his whoopee, and that's definitely Keenan Allen. But you mentioned it too. I mean, I'm a big believer in money talks, and they just gave Williams a nice big contract. I always thought he was a little bit of an underrated player because he was kind of a boom or bust guy with the old staff. And now with the Saints, offensive system kind of being installed there, he catches more slants and more comebacks and more intermediate routes. So I was real torn. I'd gladly take either one, especially as like my wide receiver too.
And just looking at the wide receivers in this area, I'm all about DK Metcalf. Mike Williams, stylistically somewhat similar, actually.
Yeah.
But he's kind of the 2 or the 1A. I think Metcalf's going to be the clear 1 this year in his offense. Better quarterback, obviously, but the ball would get spread around maybe a little bit more with the Los Angeles Chargers. And Mike Williams is just a little dependent on the big play. So I like DK Metcalf on a lot of teams. Don't like Mike Williams as much on my fantasy teams this year in the same zone. And Keenan Allen, I'm with you. You kind of just he will drop. The thing is, you can get a deal on Keenan Allen, and you have been able to almost for his entire career, which is really weird. It doesn't seem like Keenan Allen's always a little bit too late.
100%.
Yeah.
He always outperforms his ADP. I bet every year.
It feels like that.
Yeah.
Next, we will get to Tyreek Hill's teammate in Miami. How is that ball going to get divvied up? Very different quarterback for Tyreek Hill now in Miami than he had in Kansas City. We'll get through number 18 through 30 and then talk about some of the other potential league winners, breakout players, sleepers among fantasy wide receivers in 2022. But first, we've got to let the folks out there know about BetOnline and tons of NFL futures that you could bet on already for the 2022 season at BetOnline, your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest developments, league reviews, news, including Major League Baseball, hitting the All-Star break pretty soon here. We've already got Summer League going for the next NBA season. It seems like the NBA season never sleeps, just like the NFL season does. So yeah, you can bet on the next Super Bowl champion, the next coach to get fired, offensive, defensive, rookies, players of the year. You can even bet on lines all the way through week 17, week 18, I believe now at BetOnline for the next football season, your continued source for all your sports wagering and information, live betting, esports, Vegas casino games, and more. So go to BetOnline right now. Use your desktop or mobile device to learn more about the trends in action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're subscribed up to the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. That is the home of Peacock and Williamson, as well as the Locked On NFL Show and tons of other great content. Okay, Matt, what do you think about Jalen Waddle here? This would be an ascending player. He had 100 catches last year, right? And yet he's wide receiver 18. And that's because Tyreek Hill's in town and similar skill sets. I don't even know how this offense is going to look. Are they just going to pepper, 4 or 5 yard passes and let the speedsters go to work with Tua at quarterback and knowing Mike McDaniel coming from the Kyle Shanahan system, is it going to be short and intermediate all day long? Are they going to pop a few? Is there going to be such an emphasis on the run game that maybe both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle disappoint this year? It's a hard offense to figure out as far as fantasy goes.
It absolutely is. And Tua's very good at RPOs and getting it out quick and short to intermediate accuracy. And they had a terrible O-line last year, maybe the worst in the league. So maybe that contributed to less downfield passing as well. I think that they will expand that. In the dynasty world, Waddle is worth more than Tyreek Hill, and that's not what we're doing here. But it wouldn't blow me away if at the end of the year he had more fantasy points than Tyreek, because I think Waddle's exceptional and he's ascending. And that's why I was a little low on Hill. It was more of a Waddle concern than a concern about Tyreek. It'll bother me to no end, though, if these guys are catching balls 1 yard behind the line of scrimmage over and over and over. But I trust this offensive system much more than I did the last one. And I just think this is a highly, highly talented and dangerous player.
Yeah, I don't know if it's system or quarterback driven or it was a combination.
Or is it Tua, right?
Year.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that Waddle had 104 catches and 1,000 yards as a rookie, right? Like any other time in the history of the league, if you had a rookie wide receiver who was drafted in the top 10 like Waddle was, he had 100 catches as a rookie, we'd be talking about this guy going among the first 5 wide receivers in the draft.
It's like Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Waddle had like 20, 25 more catches than Jamar Chase last year. As rookies,
right. I mean, a lot of them were 1 yarders, but still. That's right.
Jamar Chase had 400 more yards than Waddle. I'm looking at it right now. Waddle had, sub 10, 9.8 yards per reception. But he was a big play guy in college, all this speed. So he didn't pop enough of the runs after the catch, wasn't targeted enough down the field. That's why, I have no idea what to expect from this offense. You got to think there's going to be more yards per reception there, even if the targets aren't there, even if he doesn't get 140 targets like he did last year because Tyreek's in town.
And every draft class, somebody says, well, this is a fast receiver in the draft. He's Tyreek like fast. And every year they're pretty much wrong, because I don't remember anybody like Tyreek in the last 10 or 15 years, except for maybe Waddle. I mean, Waddle, watching him at Bama, I bought it that this guy is as electric and as explosive. Some might beat Tyreek in a 60-yard dash or whatever, a guy like Ruggs. But I mean, just explosive with pads on. He's that Tyreek level guy. I don't know if it's good. I don't think it's good that they're both out there. It's great for the Dolphins. I don't think it's great for us in the fantasy world.
Yeah, it would be like alternating weeks where one guy goes big, the other guy doesn't, and you're like,
right. Who has the weak corner that week? Or,
it was the weak corner. Yeah, which teams decide they're going to roll coverage over toward Tyreek, and then Waddle goes off, something like that. Brandy Cooks coming in at number 19, sort of the new Keenan Allen, where he's just sort of
he's a value every year,
performs his ADP, and nobody's ever excited about Brandon Cooks, partially because I think it just hurts. It hurts from a PR perspective when players bounce around to different teams. And I think that's definitely hurt Brandon Cooks, but that means he's going to be a value for you as the wide receiver one for a young quarterback that they might have something in Davis Mills there, right?
Yeah, and they gave him money. I mean, they were dumping players left and right, and he was never one of them. Garbage time, of course, is in play here as well. But I just think he's a very, very good player. Just an odd career. I mean, he's bounced around a lot, but it's not like he's getting cut left and right and nobody wants him. People are giving up first-round picks for him, and he's still a younger player considering how much experience he has. He is a little bit boring to walk up to the podium and put this sticker up there, but I guarantee you he gets 1,000 yards this year and probably 8 touchdowns.
Talk to me about Deontay Johnson coming in at wide receiver 20 for you. What is that Steelers offense even going to look like? And where is Deontay Johnson in the pecking order? Because you got him as the top Steelers wide receiver.
There's some rumblings the last couple of days that the Steelers and Cowboys have talked about a Deontay Johnson trade. I can't confirm or deny that, but I could see that being an aggressive move for Dallas. And I can't assure that, the Steelers are psyched about giving Deontay $19, $20 million like, the McLaurins of the world. But he's clearly their best receiver. He's their best guy versus man coverage, which is key. He's a target hog. I mean, when he's on the field the last 2 or 3 years, only guys like Devontae Adams have more targets than Johnson. And he was Ben's whoopee. There's no doubt about that. But I also think targets are earned. And I think that his targets will probably go down a little because they'll probably throw the ball a little less. They threw the ball a lot last year, too much. But I also think he'll catch a lot fewer, kind of like Waddle, 2-yard slants because Ben just wants to get the ball out of his hands. I bet his ADOT goes up, but his targets go down a little.
I was going to say his statistic line was almost identical to Waddle's last year.
Yeah.
He got 3 more balls, essentially, and maybe an extra yard per reception.
But it would amaze you, BP, over the last 2 years when I do like a national radio hit or, a fantasy show, everyone always asks me, who's the Steelers' number one receiver? It's Deontay Johnson by a mile, folks.
And I've heard people talk about Pickett's deep ball. Maybe that'll change. Maybe it's Chase Claypool time, and we'll get to that. Maybe he's one of the
interesting.
Is he a sleeper for you, or is somebody you're targeting?
He's remarkably cheap in fantasy right now,
Yes.
and I don't understand it at all, to be honest with you. And he might outperform Deontay this year. I may even be still too low on Claypool.
He's outside the top 40 or 50 right now in ADP, right?
It's bonkers.
Claypool, as far as wide receivers go.
Because he only caught 1 touchdown last year.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks he's not good anymore. He basically played exactly like he did as a rookie when the world loved him, when he had like 11 touchdowns. And last year he had 1. So now they don't like him anymore.
Here's a big question.
Yeah, this
about the Denver Broncos. Who's the wide receiver to own there? I've loved Jerry Jeudy ever since pre-draft. Just his footwork, his ability to separate. Maybe all he needed was a quarterback that can hit him in timing now. Maybe Russell Wilson's that guy. But you've got Cortland Sutton as wide receiver 21. You've got him ahead of Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy will show up in just a minute here, but the bounce back didn't quite happen year one post ACL for Cortland Sutton, but the quarterback situation was bad and some mouths to feed. I'm sort of torn on the Denver offense. It's one of those where it's kind of like the Kyle Shanahan running backs, where I just wait for the third guy and draft him late.
Yeah,
get some value there.
Yeah, I doubt I would grab Sutton as a 21st receiver off the board, and I'm psyched to get him right there. I'd rather he fell to the 24th receiver off the board and Judy's gone or whatever. I'm torn on Jeudy versus Sutton in that I don't think Sutton was himself last year. You mentioned coming off the ACL, and we all just assume, he's on the field, he's 100%. And I'm a big believer in Matt Harmon's reception perception. And he thought the first half of the year Sutton was really dragging that leg, and then he got better and better. I love Wilson, but I don't know that he's the precision timing passer that Jeudy really, really needs, as opposed to Sutton being the pseudo Metcalf go up and get it guy. So as these rankings indicate, I'm leaning more towards Sutton, especially.
And I will say, I don't even know if he'll be drafted, but he's like the first waiver wire pickup. Tim Patrick is just
really good,
really underrated and really good player. He's going to take some targets away from both those guys.
Yeah, and I think Alberto's okay as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting breakout candidate we talked about during our tight end war room for fantasy football purposes. All right. Next, we'll talk 22 through 30 and then highlight some other sleepers for the 2022 season at wide receiver. But first, I want to let the folks out there know about our friends at Rock Auto. Save time and money using Rock Auto. Don't pay more than you have to for your auto parts. You go to the chain store, guess what? You're paying double in a lot of cases, at least 50% more markup at that chain store for the same exact part that you could get at rockauto.com. For example, you're looking for a Honda Odyssey fuel pump. That's going to run you about $353 from a chain store. You go to rockauto.com, find the same part for $216. Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every customer, do-it-yourselfer and professionals alike. Rock Auto is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They've helped me. It is very easy, and I'm always blown away by the selection at Rock Auto. Big parts, small parts, brake parts, tail lamps, carpet for the interior of your vehicle, motor oil, wiper blades, everything you need to keep your car on the road, you can find at rockauto.com. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. We are down to wide receiver 22 here, and you've got Hollywood, Marquise Brown at 22. I like Marquise Brown early in the season. They paid a little to get up. He's their wide receiver one, got a good quarterback, got an offense where they're going to throw the football, right? But then second half of the year, do you draft him and then flip him? What do you do when DeAndre Hopkins returns?
Yeah, and that's a cardinal problem across the board too. I mean, all these little people seem to wear down as the season goes on, including the quarterback. Well, I think the first 6 weeks set up extremely well for Brown. So I think people look at fantasy too much through the lens of, just win week 1, just win week 2, so I have him pretty high. I love DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's going to the Hall of Fame, but I also think he's another one that slipped a little last year with his tape as well. And what if he slips a little more, or, maybe he needed PEDs to be, to stay up to where he's, I mean, there's a reason these guys take these things, and he got busted. Brown's advanced metrics are always really good with the Ravens, despite them in 22 personnel and him in a condensed formation where Arizona is going to spread the field as wide as possible and let him be fast. So I'm on board. I mean, he worries me a little in December. Don't get me wrong.
Could definitely be an all or nothing player there in that offense. And, he goes for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns in 1 week and has 3 catches for 27 yards another week.
Yeah. I mean, even like AJ Green's not terrible, and Rondell Moore's going to catch passes, and the 2 tight ends, they'll be fine without Hopkins for a while, but then Hopkins comes in and is the number 1, and they all bump down the ladder a spot,
This is a tough one for me because the
really hard one
is there, but Amon-Ra St. Brown had a really nice rookie year, but he's just he's a wide receiver 2, but he's being treated as a wide receiver 1 in this offense. And I just, you don't have to draft him super high, but he's almost going to go too high for my taste in just about any. Oh, I skipped Allen Robinson too, by the way. So you got Allen Robinson at 23, who's got
Allen Robinson's really hard for me.
And Amon-Ra St. Brown. Both of these are actually really hard for me. Allen Robinson, I like the fit. And actually, there's probably a much better chance Allen Robinson ends up on my teams than Amon-Ra St. Brown in this general range.
Yeah. And I love his situation. We saw Odell thrive there opposite Cup. Good quarterback, good scheme. Robinson hasn't been productive for a while, though.
I just think this is perfectly set up for him. And everyone's going to forget about Allen Robinson and be like, oh, yeah, look, he just had 80 catches and, 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns because he can trust his quarterback. His quarterback's going to put it on him. And he's always been good at getting open and catching the football. And, motivation will probably be better for him being on a team that has Super Bowl aspirations than whatever the heck was going on in Chicago the last few years. So I feel good about Allen Robinson. You go back to college, Allen Robinson's never had a good quarterback.
It's bonkers. Christian Hackenberg,
Hackenberg to Bortles to
Foles maybe, and then
like whatever was going on the revolving door in Chicago, and
it's bonkers. Yeah.
Now he's got Matthew Stafford,
and they gave him big money, and he's still pretty young, so I think he'll be probably a low end fantasy wide receiver 2 and a quality 1 and consistent.
Hunter Renfrow, 25 for you here.
This is PPR, remember, and that's also important for St. Brown because I think both those guys are going to be highly targeted, but not deep downfield.
Yes. PPR, very, very important. Does he take a step back with Davante Adams in town? Is the question I have.
He almost has to, but I think Waller takes a little more of a step back, and I think Adams takes a little more of a step back, from where they've been. I just keep looking at Renfrow and think he is such a Patriot, and the Patriot way is coming to Vegas. How are they not going to throw him 3rd and 4 is going to Renfrow?
Yeah, you're right. It's tough because 103 catches, 1,000 yards last year.
Right.
The Jalen Waddle line, almost exactly. You can't expect more necessarily because of, even if he did, he's, Patriot ways in town, they're going to throw him more than that. And he doubled his previous year too. So that was sort of, are we going to look back and be like, oh, remember Hunter Renfrow had that crazy 100 catch year. And then he just kind of, fell back down into being a 70 catch guy, 60 catch guy, 50
possible
like that. So that's what it worries me with Hunter Renfrow is like, I don't see the upside of going extra. Like Jalen Waddle, same stat line last year. I could see where he goes crazy. Right.
Waddle might be a top 5 pick next year. There's no chance Renfrow is.
Right. Yeah, there's not that upside, and you're betting on just that he's just gets crazy targets. And when you're on the same field with Davante Adams, I just can't see Derek Carr going to Hunter Renfrow that much more often than Davante Adams.
The flip side to that, and I'm not going to fight you on what you just said, is even the Cole Beasleys of the world are useful in PPR. They're wide receiver 3s. They're not sexy. They don't win you the league. But I think Renfro's better football player than those type of players and has a very high PPR floor.
Where's the tier break here at the end of the list? We're running out of time, so I want to go through 26 through 30 here, the last 5 that you have ranked out with numbers, and then you have rankings going beyond there, and I want to target a few of those names. You got Rashad Bateman, 26, Gabriel Davis, 27, Russell Gage, 28, Jerry Jeudy, 29, Darnell Mooney, 30. And the thing I'm looking at in this range is I love the guys that are their team's best receiver and have a chance to go bigger. Gabriel Davis.
Like a Bateman.
Right. So Bateman and Mooney are the guys I'm targeting.
Yeah.
I'm letting other people draft Davis, Gage. Jeudy I kind of like because he could be that too, but it's a little bit hazier. But nobody's going to be targeted as long as they're healthy all year on their rosters more than Bateman and Mooney.
The reason there's a gap between them, and it's not a huge one, it's 26 and 30, is I think Bateman is much better qualified to handle the number one corner. I don't think Mooney's ever a 1 on any team. He's a default 1, where I think Bateman could turn into an NFL 1. I just think he's a much better. Again, I'd much rather Bateman on the Steelers than I'd have Mooney. You know what I mean?
I put Mooney more like with aman-ra St. Brown. Very different players, but they're a default 1, but they're more of a should-be wide receiver 2 guy.
Yeah, they don't drive the ship. I think Bateman can possibly drive the ship.
Looking at some sleepers here in 2022, I know there are some players that you love, like Elijah Moore. Was it hard for you not to put Elijah Moore in your top 30 or your top 12?
Yeah, I did. I would have him very, very high. I just wish they didn't draft Wilson and everyone. I mean, you get Corey Davis for nothing. Corey Davis isn't a bad player either. And how many completions is Wilson going to have at the end of the year?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
it's a lot of mouths to feed. So it's really hard. And one of those guys is going to go big, and it might be Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's really good. And he might be pretty ready to play and come in and take a lot of those targets. And so do you have to go 3 wide to have Elijah Moore on the field even,
Yeah.
So that's tough. Is good of a player he is. Better real player than fantasy player maybe this year.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of mouths to feed, and I don't love this cook to feed them all. This chef.
By the way, speaking of Garrett Wilson, Matt Williamson hates rookie wide receivers. We haven't talked about a single one yet. Who's your top rookie wide receiver this year? I'm looking at the list. You got to go all the way down to, I believe it's Chris Olave.
Yeah. Well, Drake London's quickly behind him. I do hate rookie receivers this year. I think this is a very overrated rookie class of receivers, to be honest with you. But there's a 2-point question, because 40, 41, and 42 on my list are highly successful guys that we're not going to see for a while. Hopkins, Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin. And I'm not getting any good news on Thomas at all. And so I think Olave might be the number 1 there. And I actually think Jarvis Landry is kind of maybe a cheap number wide receiver 3 too, that's close to being sexy. Olave is pretty NFL ready. I can see him having a good year, not a great one.
If Michael Thomas isn't as 100% as you can be today, right now, to start training camp, let alone in week 1, then he might be done. Because how can he might be done? Ready to go right now?
It's been a long time. This ankle's gone on forever. I mean, I'd like some good news. So those 3, Hopkins, Thomas, Godwin will play. We know when Hopkins comes back, but I just ranked them all together to just totally cheat.
One player that I'm targeting in a lot of leagues because he's just available so late, and he's going to be the top target, in my opinion, for a Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. And we saw how that went for Davante Adams. And I'm not projecting Davante Adams' production for Allen Lazard. But if Aaron Rodgers goes out of his way during the offseason to talk about how Allen Lazard's ready to be his wide receiver 1, then that's good enough for me. So I'm going to be drafting him in a lot of leagues, and you get him late.
Yeah, and we had Peter on from Locked On Packers, and he talked him up higher than this ranking would indicate. And he probably will be their most targeted receiver. And I am interested to hear Rodgers, training camp comments about him. But he's never been a high target guy already, and they've played together a lot. I wish I saw more to this point.
Speaking of wide receiver 1s, what about Christian Kirk? Could he go earn his money with a big second-year breakout from Trevor Lawrence, a quarterback, and a much better offense to play in?
I think so. I think he is probably, when it's all said and done, is a really good flex or a wide receiver 3. And a lot of people, and I was in this boat too, just like to make fun of the contract, but that doesn't matter for us. They love him. That's all we need to know. He's going to be their top receiver, and he's a good football player, and what I think is a vastly improved team.
Amari Cooper's down here really far outside of your top 30. And actually, I can't find him because he's gone.
He's
so
33.
33 for you here. Okay, yeah, right after Elijah Moore. The quarterback situation obviously plays into it there in Cleveland. Would it change things if the Browns ended up with Jimmy Garoppolo or something like that for this season? Or if maybe there was news on Deshaun Watson being a 8-game suspension instead of all year long?
I guess the best way for me to phrase that is he has nowhere to go but up, because I know exactly what Cooper is, and he's a quality player. He's obviously their number one. I'm ranking him right now as though he has 17 games of Brissett. So subject to change, but probably only for the positive. But he won't go real high. I mean,
yeah, I kind of like that right now too, because even though Brissett might be somebody that doesn't win the Browns a ton of games, he's good enough to win you some fantasy games with however many times he targets Amari Cooper, right?
Yeah, right.
You can have good fantasy wide receiver production for bad quarterbacks sometimes, even though your team's not winning on the field.
Like if I'm loaded at running back early in the draft, and maybe I took a tight end really high, I would gladly take Amari and Christian Kirk and have them fight for my wide receiver 3 job, or you know what I mean, or start them both if I have to, if I'm loaded everywhere else, because they'll be fine. They're not going to win me the league though.
If you don't like those rankings, find Matt Williamson on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Let him know if you love the rankings. You can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock. Appreciate everybody making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. And Matt and I, we're going live on Tuesday, right? Getting back into the Tuesday live chat. So be here with us, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, Tuesday. Talk to you then. Peacock and Williamson.